You're listening to another episode of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, episode 135. My name is Chris Rickenbaugh, and as I said, this is the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, formerly known as the Figuring It Out Finance Podcast. And if you've been tuning in, you know exactly what this podcast is about. But if you're listening for the first time, my name is Chris, and I'm documenting my journey in real estate and business, and also talking a little bit about travel hacking and personal finance. Today's topic is going to really follow what I posted on Instagram and TikTok yesterday. So if you don't follow me there, go check me out at leadway.wealth. And then if you're listening to this podcast, you can keep listening right where you are or check it out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or Podbean. So you can listen to me everywhere. So let's hop into today's topic. So if you follow me on Instagram and TikTok, this is exactly what I was talking about yesterday, is knowing the game that you are playing. So there's definitely different ways to play each game, knowing what position you're in. And this is going to really mimic a lot of what I talked about on equity and cash flow a couple episodes ago. But I really wanted to break down, here's the game, here's why you're playing. So you should really stick to this strategy. So when I talk about games, this is what I mean. And the best example I can give is the Monopoly example. So the point of Monopoly is to get as many houses as you can and build up as many houses and as much cash as you possibly can. So if that is the goal of the game, you're going to be playing a specific way. You're going to try and get as many houses. You're going to try and build up as much cash and bankrupt everybody else. But if the game was a little bit different and the goal to win was to go around the board as many times as possible, you would be playing the game differently. So, this is something that's talked about in real estate a lot, and I'm going to tie it back in here, is that you have to know which game you're playing. Because for my goal specifically, my goal right now is to get as much active income as possible. So I need to be flipping, I need to be wholesaling, I need to be getting any type of fees possible to be able to bring business to me for that active income. So that's what I'm doing with flipping and wholesaling. But if my goal is active income, I really shouldn't be focusing on acquiring a bunch of rentals that pay me $200 a month, because I'm leaving so much equity in these houses. And if you've been tuning into these podcasts, I've talked about the hoarder house. So that was going to be a really good flip. Probably was going to profit me 40 to 50 grand. But now that we had this deal with the squatter and it's just taking so much longer to get them out, I'm going to have to hold on to that property and probably keep it as a rental. So let's just say it rents out for $2,000 a month. I can maybe get $2,500 for it. That's going to be zero cash flow. So I know the $2,500 minus $2,000, it's like, oh, that's $500. But if you're really doing this thing the right way, you need to be taking out fees like CapEx, operating expenses, and saving up for all of those emergencies. So by the time you get around to your cash flow, it's zero or in the negative, because you're going to be paying those expenses per month. And that's a safe way to do it. So for that house, if I was to keep it as a rental, then I would be playing a different game. I'd be trying to build as much equity as I can, because that would be the strategy if I kept keeping these houses. But with my goal being active income, it's like I need to find a way to be able to sell that house and make money off of it. So that's what I'm talking about in different games. And I really wanted to go through some of those different games, whether you're into active income, whether you're into passive income, or you're looking to build wealth. So let's hop into that. So let's start right off with active income, since I've already been talking about it a little bit. So in real estate, some of the three ways you're going to be, looking at getting active income is making this a business. So a business in real estate, the main ones are going to be flipping, wholesaling, and then Airbnb, because Airbnb is not passive. I mean, you're going to be very, very hands-on unless you've built up a huge business to where you're not really hands-on in that business and you have a bunch of people taking it over for you. And in the end of the day, it's still not passive. That is active income because it is a business. So flipping, wholesaling, and Airbnb are going to be active income because you're going to be able to get the biggest return off of it. So if you wholesale a house, you can easily, make a 10 grand assignment fee in a month. Flipping, you can flip a house and make, 30 to 40,000. An Airbnb, that's going to be a lot different than a long-term rental, because a long-term rental is going to be cash flowing very minimal amount of cash flow, unless you just put a ton down on it and it's cash flowing in a different way. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. But Airbnb, say you could rent that house out for $1,500 a night, but you could also rent it on Airbnb for $4,500 a month. So that is going to require a little bit more hands-on activity, because you're going to have multiple guests, you're going to have cleaning crews, you're going to have maintenance, you're going to have all of these different little things and Airbnb fees. But in the end of the day, you still make more money making it a true business. So that is active income. So if you're playing that game, for flipping, you're trying to buy that house as low as possible, put the least amount of reno into it, or hit a certain ARV to be able to sell that house, find the right buyer, and then be able to make that profit. Wholesaling, you're looking to understand how these people are flipping their houses, and knowing that, and something I've talked about with my coach, it's like, if I'm running my numbers and I'm only seeing like a $20,000 spread, I'm probably wholesaling that house, and I can, get 10, 15, 20 grand off of it, because it probably works for somebody else. But the ones that I'm looking to flip have the higher spread. So if I'm looking at a house and I'm looking at making, 60, 50, 60, 70,000, I'm going to flip that house all day, because I know I'm going to be able to make a good amount on that. So for wholesaling, what I've been told lately and what I've been getting coached on is that the lower spreads are the ones you wholesale. So that's completely different than what I thought, but that's also why you pay for mentorships, to be able to cut that learning curve. And so for Airbnb, there's plenty of different ways to do it. The higher end ones, the luxury homes, the cabins, those can all do really well, or it can be a lot simpler. Like in my small town, there's plenty of Airbnbs. There's plenty furnished monthly rentals, and they're just a little bit more hands-on. So finding a way to acquire those and then turning them into an Airbnb, that's the only way you could really look at keeping some of these houses and then turning it into a business if you're looking for that active income. So moving on to the next one, I'm going to kind of have a segue here. But say you have a job, you don't mind it, and eventually you would like to work out of it, and maybe a longer timeline, 10, 15 years. So this is where you're going to be probably looking at long-term rentals. So you don't need to be making 5 to 10K a month off this business. What you could be doing is focusing on those, base hits, the $200 long-term rentals that are going to be able to build that equity while you're transitioning into another job, or whether you're just looking to retire and have that equity. So the passive income, if you're trying to play that game and say, 10, 15 years, or that timeline, you're probably going to be looking at long-term rentals. You're going to be looking at purchasing homes, trying to get them outright, doing some seller financing, or even private money lending. Say you have an extra 40 grand in the bank, and then you're able to, that you could look to invest, and you could go lend to somebody at 12%, do 2 flips a year, and that's going to be 8 grand. So, you keep multiplying that 8 grand, and that's just passive money. You're not doing anything else with it. In 10 years, you're probably going to be able to do more than 2 houses a year, but what you could eventually keep snowballing that into is well into over 100 grand in the 10 years, because once you get a taste of it, it's something super easy, you're hands off, and you're making sure you're getting that money paid back. So private money lending is a good way to make an extra little bit here and there. And the more you save, the more you can lend. So you'll figure that out as you go. But that's way more passive than actually trying to do the flips yourself. You're just investing the money in somebody else. So focusing on long-term rentals here, this has, been passed off as those this is passive income. It's so easy, but you also have to have a little bit of the spread. You have to be budgeting correctly, because say you're only cash flowing $200 a month, and so 12 months a year. So that's doing math in my head here. So 200, so that's $2,000 on 10 month, $2,400 a month. If I'm doing that correctly, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but let's just say $2,400 a year and an HVAC goes out. All right, well, that's going to be, probably four or $5,000, and that completely wipes out your cash flow. So you have to be looking at it as more of a passive thing, and you have to be safe on that side to where if one of those things goes out, then you can easily pay for it. You're not relying on that $200 per month, because if you were, you're going to have to have so many long-term rentals to be able to be safe on that side of things. And then seller financing is another good one. If you've been in the game for a while, you've held on to properties, or, you just get really good opportunities. Or this is probably the best way for retired people who have been in the game for a long time. They have, paid off rentals, and it's like, hey, I know I can have somebody buy this, and I don't really care what the price is, but I could be getting, $1,500 a month, and nobody owes me taxes because they are being the bank. So seller financing is a great one to look into if you've been in the game for a long time, and you're just looking to step away from it. You don't want all the headaches, and that person, if you were seller financing, would clearly own the house. So that's another interesting way to do it, is if you've been in the game for a long time, or if you own a house outright, because that could, instead of doing $200 a month, that's $1,500 a month straight. So getting into the last part here, it's a nice little segue because it kind of builds into wealth building. And this is a lot of like what I see on the top real estate people, is that they started out with that active income, flipping, wholesaling, trying to get the Airbnb. And now they're like, okay, well, now that I have that money coming in, I'm starting to look a little bit more passive. And then you can really figure out the wealth creation. So it really depends on your timeline and learning curve about when you go through these three phases. So again, in this wealth building stage, we would be focusing on the long-term rentals, but you could have a different idea about them because you'd be looking at this house as this really big piggy bank. So say you have one house that's only, $200,000, but it's completely paid off. It appreciates a little bit. Say it's $250,000. Well, that's a good chunk of money. So say you sell that house, that's easily going to provide for you for a couple years. Unless you're a high spender, but that's a really good way to be able to preserve wealth. So for people that aren't looking to get super rich, or they love their job, they could just do it forever, you could just work on paying off your own house and then moving to another one, or getting a rental and just making sure that it's paid off. You don't owe anybody anything, and then doing the seller financing. That is focusing on wealth building. The only trade-off is that's going to take a very long time, or you're going to have a really high income. So if you don't have either of those two things, and you're like, well, I don't need something that I can look at in, 20 to 25, I would say 20 to 30 years. I need something within that 5 to 10. So that's where you're looking more in the passive range. And if you're like, hey, I need to make money in 6 months, that's when you need to look at active income. So the wealth building is the last part of this because it takes so long. So again, those long-term rentals, making sure they're paid off, putting a little bit more down on the payment every month. Say it's a 30-year loan, you can get it paid off in 20 to 25. You're going to be sitting really, really well on that piggy bank. So then again, you go to paid off houses. And talking about the seller financing, so right in the same ballpark of the passive income, I just felt like, you probably could do that somewhere in the passive income, but it's more focused here in the wealth building. So you're going to have those paid off houses, but the biggest part here is, you could sell those houses and you could always 1031 into something bigger. So if you have this $200,000 house that's completely paid off, and you're like, I'm just kind of tired of this. I don't want to deal with the rentals. I don't want to deal with the people. You can sell that and then use that $200,000 as a down payment and not have to pay any taxes on it through the 1031 exchange. You could easily use that to put down 20% on $1 million apartment complex that's going to be able to actually cash flow for you, still build an appreciation, and then that's how you really play the game. So you should be thinking about that in the passive income stage, is that, hey, I know this is going to be paid off and have a lot of equity at some point down the line. I could easily sell this somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years into a bigger asset through the 1031 exchange, not have to pay taxes on it, and still, have more, put 20% down on something, and then, like I was saying, be able to really work on that, more of the passive income side, to where you may have been only getting $200 a month. So now you could be looking at, $2,000 to $3,000 maybe with an apartment complex. So different way to look at it, different strategies, but you have to know the game you're playing. And then the biggest part of this wealth building phase is focusing on the equity. Like I said, it's just going to be this really big piggy bank. But you can't get there without having the active income, whether that's through owning your own business, doing it through real estate, flipping, wholesaling, Airbnb. Then you're going to be focusing on, it's like, okay, well, I don't need that active income, so I can put it into something a little bit more passive, like long-term rentals, just kind of, have it slowly growing. And then, once you have the passive income and you have a lot of equity, you're going to show, it's like, man, I could really move this into something a lot bigger and have a lot more wealth in that 20 to 30 year range, and preserve it in something bigger like an apartment complex, and then really focus on that equity, paying down that $1 million rather than, just 200. So definitely different ways to look at it. So I'm just going to end here by figuring out you need to figure out what game you're going to be playing in this game of life. So for real estate, for me, I'm 100% focused on active income. I don't want to hold any properties. So the situation for me right now with this, or I keep going back to the squatter because that's the past couple episodes, is that what I'm going to be doing is holding on to that property. I'm trying to find somebody that can do a 30-year loan, and then I'm going to have well over $100,000 sitting in that house. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm going to have built up a bigger part of the equity. That area is really going to transition in, and I'm going to have probably in the ballpark of $300,000 sitting in that house that I could easily 1031 into something that cash flows way better. So that is the game we're playing. And then the house that I'm currently in, I bought it for the reason back in 2022 to become an Airbnb or a medium-term rental. That's, I could probably get $1,400 to $1,500 in a long-term rental. I would be losing money every month, but I could turn it into this long-term rental to where I'm going to be looking at $2,500 to $3,000 a month. And that way, everything's going to be getting paid off. I don't have to worry about the house at all, coming out of pocket for things. And that is, just going to be a longer-term play because it's going to be able to maybe not cash flow great, but it's just going to be able to, put it back into the house, start paying off that mortgage for the longer term game. And then, as you know, I am flipping houses, so that is my active income, focusing a little bit more on the wholesaling part right now for, that quick 10, 15, 20 grand on flipping a contract. So that is the game I'm playing, and that is what you are going to be listening to if you keep tuning into this podcast. I have all of these episodes back from when I quit my job originally, bought my first flip, and then all the way through 7 right now, looking for more. So you're going to be able to listen to all of that right here, but that is all I have for you today. So thank you for tuning in to the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, episode 135. My name is Chris Rickenbaugh, and I will see you on the next episode.